Yes, in South Africa, there have been some new strains, BA4 and 5. They don't seem to be that much more infectious than the BA2, which is actually taking over in the United States. Whether they will take over in the United States, it's unlikely, but they're worth keeping an eye on.
Welcome to the RANE Insights podcast. I'm Emily Donahue. Let's listen as RANE founder David Lawrence speaks with Drs. Fred Southwick and Bill Lang for our weekly coronavirus update.
Fred and Bill, again, thanks for making time for us and sharing some perspectives. Over the last week plus, there's been considerable, I'll call it vaccine news. Can you bring us up to date in terms of what's happening and some of the recent disclosures and approvals?
Sure. So there's, after several months now of basically no hard news on vaccines, there have been 5 major issues in just the last week to 10 days. All of these surround the FDA announced that they are going to have a series of advisory committee meetings over the course of the month of June. So this starts with June 7th. They're reviewing Novavax's application for approval, for authorization, emergency use authorization in the United States. Commercially, that means nothing because Novavax is not going to be a significant commercial vaccine in the United States. But once the U.S. authorizes it through an EUA, there are many other countries in the world that key off of what the U.S. FDA does and then will approve it. And Novavax, because of its storage and transportation requirements being relatively easy, will have a huge international presence. It already has an international presence, but it's going to have a much larger international presence. The other thing about that is that Novavax is still working towards their combined COVID flu vaccine. Now that's a bit of a gamble for them because who knows, are we going to need it 2 years from now? They have said they will not make it ready for this coming cold flu COVID season, but they're targeting 2023. If they get their Novavax COVID vaccine approved, it's going to kind of grease the skids for getting the combined vaccine approved for next year. The second one is that the FDA committees are going to review the Pfizer and Moderna requests to extend their emergency use authorizations to address children 6 months to 5 years old. This stands to be the most controversial issue that's coming up, and the reason for that is that the efficacy in preventing symptomatic vaccine just barely meets the threshold for what a priori the FDA said was their threshold. They said 50%, and it's 51%. The fly in the ointment, though, is that there is no benefit shown, or I should say they could not draw any conclusions. Not that there was no benefit, but they could not draw any conclusions as to whether this prevented severe disease. And the reason was they didn't have any severe disease in either arm, either the vaccinated or the unvaccinated. So there was not enough, even with a very large sample size, it could not draw any statistically relevant conclusion. So what that gets down to then, you have a vaccine that only marginally may be beneficial for just preventing symptoms. No idea whether it prevents infection or not. So this is why this is going to be so controversial. Then they're also going to review Moderna for use in children 5 to 17. That's not as controversial. It's the Moderna hasn't fully released the results yet, but it looks like they're going to be, as they have been in everything else, very comparable to Pfizer's. And they, so far, what the word is that it's not showing any significant myocarditis problems with the vaccine, but that's not out yet. And then finally, this is not really something that the committees are formally reviewing, but it certainly will be discussed, is both Pfizer and Moderna have announced that they expect to have Omicron-specific vaccines available for the fall cold flu COVID season. Moderna said that they expect to have them available in commercial quantities, assuming all the approvals go through. Pfizer says that they expect to be ready to release, but it's unclear that they would have it ready in commercial quantities. So those are the 4 major approval-related things. And then the one other one, which I just heard about just before we started, is that the FDA emergency use authorization for the J&J vaccine was discontinued, so it is no longer authorized.
Fred, your thoughts? I know you've been following.
Yeah, well, the J&J has been a concern for some time in that there is this dural sinus thrombosis associated, it's rare, but it's quite devastating. And they've had a number of more cases recently, and therefore they've chosen now to withdraw J&J, at least temporarily, because of this serious, what it does is a thrombosis of the large veins of the brain, and that can cause severe cerebral edema or even death. So it is a very serious complication. It's very rare, but they're getting a signal that's stronger than it was before, and therefore have chosen to stop J&J administration for now.
One other quick vaccine issue is that there are a lot of vaccines that are in the pipeline, but just to highlight a team that's being it's a university-based team, but actually being led primarily by the U.S. Army, specifically the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, is developing a vaccine that appears to be effective against all coronaviruses. So SARS-CoV-2, but as well as SARS, as well as the minimally pathogenic coronaviruses that have been around for millennia. So that'd be very interesting what happens with that. That will not be coming out in the near future, but over the next 2 years, this is going to be one to watch.
In fact, Bill, I was going to ask about this because one of the unintended consequences of the search for a vaccine here appears to be the opening up of various promising developments around the ability of vaccines to treat a broad array of potential illnesses. And maybe I could just ask you to expand a little bit about some of the things that you're aware of that companies are working on.
Well, this one specifically is it is not a mRNA vaccine. It is more of a traditional type of vaccine. It's being done, I say, with multiple universities. The primary university is in Ireland. But they expect it's going to be, they've just moving this quarter, they're moving into human trials. So at phase 1, if it was being pushed as hard as the phase 1 trials were with the original mRNA vaccines, it could potentially be out by the end of the year. But I don't think it's not moving that quickly because of where we were. But there are at least, the most recent data I saw, at least 9 vaccines for that may have benefit against more than just SARS-CoV-2 that are moving into at or near moving into human trials. So as you said, we could be finding the cure for maybe not the cure for all the common cold, but a cure for a quarter of the common colds, which is what coronaviruses are responsible for.
Fred and Bill, there are also over the last 10 days or so additional reports of different variants around the world, and I thought maybe you could shed some light and whether you think there will be particular implications here for these variants.
Yes, in South Africa there have been some new strains, BA4 and 5. They don't seem to be that much more infectious than the BA2, which was about 30% more infectious than BA1. So that is actually BA2 is actually taking over in the United States, and I think now is the dominant strain. Whether these two are they don't seem to be any more severe. Whether they will take over in the United States, it's unlikely, but they're worth keeping an eye on.
And in addition, there's the BA4 and BA5 that are showing up in South Africa. The reason that has people concerned is they initially emerged in Botswana, which is just north of South Africa, then migrated to South Africa. That's exactly what the original Omicron did. The difference is that the original Omicron very rapidly moved into primarily the UK, and then from the UK out to the rest of the world. BA4 and BA5 don't show any sign of breaking out of South Africa, nor do they show any sign of actually being a severe disease. They are somewhat more infectious, they believe, than BA2 is, but they're not making a big impact even in South Africa, and certainly not in terms of hospitalizations or deaths.
Any impact on global travel, any guidance that you're offering clients in light of the current data in terms of their travel, visiting public events and things like that?
So the way I'm looking at it right now is if we look around the world, the place that's really having the most issue is the United States, or I should say North America in general, and especially the United States. In Europe, most countries are on the way back down. Germany, as of the end of last week, 1 in 7 cases of COVID in the whole world were being reported in Germany. But Germany is now down probably about a third of where they were at their peak. And to some extent, the numbers may have been inflated because Germans are very good about reporting their cases. They are told to report them, they report them. Elsewhere in the world, there are very, very few countries that are showing new peaks or even having significant increases in case counts. The only other one, in addition to Germany, and I said Germany's going down, but the one that is going up and it is at a new peak is Taiwan. But the rest of the world, in terms of international travel, is doing pretty well. The United States, however, we continue to see this slow, steady increase. And it's due to BA2 and BA2.12.1. Quite a word and number salad there. But if we were to follow what happened in the United Kingdom, they went up over a course of about 4 to 6 weeks and then came back down. And it was caused by the same variants, BA2 and then the BA2.12. I think it's reasonable to think that we're going to go up. Ours may be extended out a little bit because ours is hitting in spring. People are outdoors. We have a pretty high vaccination rate. So it's muting the raise in this. But I think what that may also do is kind of flatten it and spread it out a little bit. I still think, and this is crystal ball thinking. I don't have proof of this, but I still think that over the next couple of weeks in the United States, especially New York State, which is the epicenter of all this right now, is going to peak out and probably start coming back down. The alternative would be that this slow, steady rise just keeps up for multiple weeks. I don't think we're going to see that. So that's where things stand. I'm in the midst of traveling right now. I'm not uncomfortable with traveling, including internationally.
I was going to ask Bill, when you're traveling, mask on or mask off?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question because I am, and as people who've listened to this throughout, people know that I am not the I don't want to say I'm not an advocate for masking because I know, and Fred, he can talk about how he thinks that masks are very important. I have not been as hard over on the masks because I think, for one thing, most people don't wear masks correctly. But what I'm doing on travel is when I am in crowded parts of the airport, such as the TSA lines or lining up to get on the airport or on the airplane, going down the jetway, and during the whole boarding process, I'm wearing a mask. Once the plane's engines start, you're in one of the most air purified environments that there is. You're bringing in outside air, you're running through HEPA filters. The inside of a plane it's not sterile, but it's almost as clean as an operating room is because of the way they purify the air. So I'm taking my mask off during flight, putting it on again when everyone starts deplaning. So that's my approach to wearing a mask with travel.
I'm a little more conservative than Bill, but I'm wearing a mask the entire time I'm on the plane. And one of the big problems is when the plane lands, they shut off the ventilation, and then there could be a significant buildup in aerosol during that period. So right now, I'm a little concerned about traveling because only about, I would say, a quarter of people are wearing masks. So if someone sits next to you and is infected and they're not wearing a mask, even if you're wearing a mask, there's a pretty significant likelihood that you may become infected. So I'm a little worried right now about travel, actually, because of the lack of masks on planes.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. If the engines are not running, have a mask on. I fully agree with that. It's just when the engines are running, there is so much ventilation that I feel more comfortable. Now, don't get me wrong. If I was a little older than I am or had any risk factors, I'd wear a mask, and I'd wear a high quality mask the whole time.
Yeah, I think the key is you want an N95
Exactly.
mask or equivalent to it.
And I would just add, I assume similar advice for people who may be eligible for and contemplating getting a second booster around their vaccines.
Well, that's actually an important issue, and I would be interested in Fred's thoughts on this. With the second booster now, especially that Pfizer and Moderna both are saying, well, especially Moderna, saying that they should have boosters that are Omicron specific available in the early part of the fall of this year. Does getting a booster now at all impact the effectiveness, the probable effectiveness of a booster with an Omicron specificity in the fall?
I'm not sure. I don't think we know the answer to that. We've had used boosters and repeated vaccines in the past, and they don't necessarily, you don't see a reduction in response after an interval of time. I guess one of the concerns is if we get too much, maybe people will develop tolerance. But I've been on lookout for that particular issue and have not encountered it as yet. I don't know if you have, Bill.
Now, the only thing that I've read, and I haven't read anybody who says anything definitive, but just is commenting on the possibility, is that the Omicron vaccine is similar enough to the existing antigens that it's very possible that if you have lots of antibodies running around to the original vaccines, to the original virus, and you get this new one, that your body may chew up the vaccine before it has a chance to develop an immune response to it. So it would still work as a good booster for the original COVID, but it would not give you enough Omicron responses to have good effectiveness. But there is no good data that shows that at all. That's what we're waiting to see.
Bill, I don't know whether the term perfection is the enemy of the good applies here. I can only report anecdotally from New York. A lot of people people who have actually been compliant with the getting 2 vaccines and a booster, and at least at this point, I think at the tail end of this, seem to be coming down with COVID. You have to be wary of what the data says and anecdotally what your circle of relationships and friends say, but a lot of people, are coming down with this, and sometimes it's actually pretty challenging, notwithstanding people of who are just middle-aged or not senior citizens, and they don't have pre-occurring significant health risks.
So along those lines, one other good issue to talk about is what's happening with Paxlovid. There's been a lot of news reports in the past past week or so, about people who take Paxlovid and then having about 7 days plus or minus, after they finish their course of Paxlovid, they have a recurrence of symptoms and a recurrence of positive antigen test. I've actually had it in 2 patients that I've worked with. The patients I've seen and almost all the patients I've read about, when they have this recurrence of symptoms and recurrence of positivity, it's very minor. I have seen a couple of reports of patients that were actually more severely ill after this recurrence than they were with the original, with whatever they had before they started taking the Paxlovid. It's not changing my prescribing approach to Paxlovid at all, though, because we're not seeing it a high percentage of patients, and everyone I've seen and almost everybody I've read about, they do very well after having if they have a recurrence. So I'm not too worried about it.
The Paxlovid hasn't been used as much as I would like in Florida as yet. I'm hoping it's going to be used more. It's very possible that 5 days of Paxlovid won't be sufficient and that the virus could temporarily relapse. So that is a concern. And I don't know, Bill, but it would make sense. Perhaps they should go with another 5-day course. I don't know what they're doing in that circumstance.
FDA has actually said no, that is not authorized. They've said basically read the EUA. Now, are they going to change it as they get more data coming in? It's very, very much unclear. But it's acting almost like the Paxlovid is. I've never heard this term used, so I may be inventing one. But virustatic. It's keeping the virus from growing, but it's not eliminating the virus. I don't think it's having a huge impact, but it is something for people and providers to be aware of.
Just on a closing note, Bill, I know you've been following some of the data coming out of China and most recently out of Beijing. Maybe you can give us a quick overview.
So the biggest thing I'd say is that Shanghai looks like it's coming out of it. However, Beijing, they said, no, we're not having any problems as they closed down the subway system throughout Beijing. You don't close the subways when you're not having any problems. They're still reporting very, very few cases and almost no deaths, but they closed the subways. That's not a trivial exercise. That's all I know.
Bill, what is the vaccine status in China? What percent are vaccinated?
Well, again, they report a very high percentage vaccinated. However, what's very interesting is that they deprioritized their senior citizens. So they prioritized vaccination for their 20 to 50-year-olds, and then they're coming back and picking up the senior citizens. So they had, up until recently, they had about a 15% vaccination rate amongst people 65 and over. They are now going back and picking up the older population, but this is just new that they're getting the older population. That's part of the reason they've been having problems.
Yeah, that's very surprising. That's backwards of what most countries did, because those that are elderly have the highest risk of severe disease, and therefore they should be vaccinated first.
Well, the Chinese philosophy was vaccinate those who are the units of production first.
And by the way, just a final point on this, Bill, but the vaccines that have been deployed in China are different than Moderna and Pfizer.
They've deployed primarily Sinovac and Sinopharm, which they're similar to the AstraZeneca vaccine in the type of vaccine, but they have not been demonstrated to be anywhere near as efficacious. I mean, they work, but they're not that efficacious. It's very difficult because we have companies that have people working in Shanghai and Beijing. It's very difficult to get an mRNA vaccine in China. They are trying to make their own, but last I've heard, they have not fielded an mRNA vaccine.
Fred, Bill, once again, thanks for the time, the insights. Appreciate your staying on top of things for us, and look forward to continuing the conversation in 2 weeks, and obviously earlier if something material arises. Stay safe, guys.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
Dr. Bill Lang is an expert in public health responses to biological incidents, including pandemics. Dr. Fred Southwick is an infectious disease specialist at the University of Florida College of Medicine. Both doctors are part of the RANE Expert Network. Individuals and organizations turn to RANE for risk intelligence that cuts through the hype to focus on what they need to know, what to expect, and what to do. Sign up for our coronavirus solution. Visit us at ranenetwork.com. That's RANE network.com. I'm Emily Donahue. Thanks for listening.